Focus here is African American sports and science. At the end, you want to be able to define these 19 terms. Many of these terms are actually people and their contribution. You want to use the AP source framework. And for the most part, we're going to be using this sheet here as we try to answer the questions at the bottom as we're coming up to the end of this course. We're going to first start off with the sports section, and you're going to be introduced to a whole list of individuals and their contribution to sports and African American history. All highlighted terms represent definitions that you want to be able to define. And we're first starting out with Reconstruction, as they're talking about all of these segregated sports since the end of slavery, starting with segregation. And in the 1800s, we're looking at primarily two jockeys, which is a horse race, Oliver Lewis, William Billy Walker, who would win the Kentucky Derby, as it mentions down here. Most winners of the Derby being African American until the 20th century. The Colored Hockey League, oddly in Canada. And then Jackie Robinson, who would integrate baseball. And we're going to spend some time going back to the Gift of Alvin White, which was one of the first readings assigned in this course. We have some other figures here. Jesse Owens, who would win 4 gold medals at the 36 Olympics, oddly enough taking place in Germany at the height of Hitler's racism and inferior superiority racial ideologies. Muhammad Ali, a heavyweight boxer, and Tommy Smith and John Carlos, who are influenced by the Black Panther Party, as well as Muhammad Ali, who would eventually change his name from Cassius Clay to Muhammad Ali. As mentioned before, 2 Kentucky Derby winners, Billy Walker and Oliver Lewis. This is a required AP source, which is why it's highlighted in green, and this is an image depicting their success. The Colored Hockey League in the late 1800s. As it mentions here, it was a way to attract men to church. And here we see some of the hockey players in these 2 images. Treat the Colored Hockey Championship and League as a definition. Another example of segregated sports. This one I'm adding in here, it is the boxing match between Jack Johnson and James Jeffries, which is depicted here in this advertisement. What's significant about this fight, and you can take a look at the clip here, is that it was titled The Great White Hope because the hope here was that James Jeffries, a white boxer, was going to win in the 1900s. And when he lost to Jack Johnson, it led to race riots in the United States because white America was so upset that a black American was able to beat a white American in the early 1900s. Continuing with these racial ideologies, Jesse Owens in the 1936 Olympics, which took place in Nazi Germany, would win 4 gold medals, which proved Hitler's racial ideology to be incorrect. We'll be looking at this clip here from the Century series, which is a documentary, and the beginning of it shows Jesse Owens in those Olympics. At some point, a movie was made about his experience called Race. Jackie Robinson, if you don't recall, in Unit 2 and 3, we looked at numerous segregation laws that talked about segregated baseball, and Jackie Robinson would be the individual to integrate Major League Baseball. In this link here, Jackie Robinson steals home. And oddly enough, I found a connection to this TV show, What's Happening, Season 1, Episode 13. In this particular episode, Raj Thomas, one of the leading characters in the series, is in the hospital, and his hospital roommate is an angry, older African American. Raj's sister befriends him and come to find out that the man was actually in the Negro Leagues and is upset with his daughter who married a white man. So we'll be looking at from 1524, that particular episode. Muhammad Ali, a heavyweight boxer. His name was initially Cassius Clay and changed his name to Muhammad Ali after being influenced by the ideas of Malcolm X. This link has his greatest knockouts, and in this clip here, it's a documentary clip about Ali refusing the draft because, as many African Americans pointed out, there was a feeling that African Americans were overrepresented in the Vietnam conflict. So here he is being drafted, having to register for selective service and making a political statement by not wanting to enter that particular conflict, which kind of reminds me of the double V victory that we looked at during World War II. Side note, there is a film, One Night in Miami. In the movie One Night Miami, you come to find out that Muhammad Ali, Sam Cooke, Malcolm X, and a football star by the name of Jim Brown were close friends. And we'll look at this trailer here. And it's an interesting movie because in that film you see Malcolm X trying to influence Sam Cooke to become more politically active in his music, and some of the tension between these four men and how they dealt with the racial problem in America in the 1960s. Another required image from the AP framework, Tommy Smith, John Carlos giving the Black Panther salute, the Black Power salute. And we looked at this already a couple of classes ago. This clip here will take you to the story behind. It's more of a documentary clip where you get to hear these individuals in recent time talk about their experience. Fast forward to Colin Kaepernick, an NFL player who opted to take a knee during the national anthem, as it mentions here in 2016. This is another required source, and here we have a clip of Colin Kaepernick taking a knee, and then criticism by the President of the United States, Donald Trump. As we're finishing up the sports section, we want to go back to the Alvin White reading that we looked at in the beginning of the course, where the author basically mentioned a whole list of African American contributors to society, to American history, to numerous presidents, and how they pretty much have gone unrecorded in their contributions. I'm asking this question here: what role could Black heroes have played in changing the direction of Black America in society? One of the things the Black Panther Party was advocating for was a Black history, some sort of cultural awareness. Even leaders before, if we look back at the Negritude movement, we also see some of those ideas emerging. And so we're trying to look at that particular issue. And when you learn about all of these individuals in sports and about the transition to science, how could understanding of Black contribution in American history change the racial issues in America? So we want to think about these three questions here. This is going to be a quick pause as we discuss these particular issues, considering all of the information that we have learned. How has this course changed you? What have you learned in this course that you did not in history courses you have completed so far? This goes right back to the point Alvin White was making. Now we're going to transition to science, medicine, and technology. We're using the same sheet. And here we have some names that are mentioned in the AP framework. Here's an image from, I believe it was Unit 3, George Washington Carver, who eventually became a botanist and professor, who was born a slave, worked with Theodore Roosevelt. Here we have Katherine Johnson, a mathematician working for NASA, and Mae Jemison, who would become the first African-American woman in outer space in 1992. This section is primarily about hospitals. You want to go back to Unit 3, where we looked at situations where, like, a white nurse could, by the law, defy taking care of a sick African American, primarily because of the segregation law in the state of Alabama that said a white nurse could not take care of a Black male patient, which is going to lead to segregated hospitals, as well as the Black hospital movement. Considering these laws that exist, this is the reason why you're starting to see in the early 1900s this push to have separate hospitals. As it mentions here, the National Medical Association is trying to support training for Black medical professionals. They were initially barred from entry into the American Medical Association. which is why you see these colleges trying to do something about the segregation laws, which would allow African Americans to get medical assistance. This is the scenario that we looked at before, and according to this law, no person or corporation shall require any white female nurse to nurse in wards of rooms in hospital, public or private, in which Negro men are placed. So this is a dilemma, because if educational opportunities are limited and you do not have black nurses, and the law says that white nurses don't have to take care of Negro men, how are these men going to get any sort of medical assistance? Which is why you're going to see the establishment of black hospitals, as you see in this particular image here. Nurses are assisting a doctor during an emergency case. The year is 1907. The work of Daniel Hale Williams, who would found the Provident Hospital in Chicago, and that particular work would be crucial in trying to get nurses registered. The AP framework also mentions this individual, Onesimus. There's not too much information about him. They also transitioned to Kazemakia Corbett, crucial in COVID-19 vaccine development. And we're going to transition back to Daniel Hale Williams with the Provident Hospital, the first owned black hospital. And again, the reason why he's crucial and this hospital is crucial because women like Emma Reynolds will become nurses, and then they would be able to take care of black men, because remember, the laws are suggesting that you do not have to take care of a black patient as a white nurse, which is going to lead to limited medical care for African Americans, primarily African American men. The AP framework also mentions a connection between the Civil Rights Movement to the ADA, the Americans with Disability Act. And one of the things you want to think about here is that the Black Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s influences other groups. And those other groups tried to look at their circumstances and make changes. Here we have the sit-ins, sip-ins, and the fish-ins. Now, as we zoom into that slide, we get a bigger picture. We're going to start out with the sit-ins, Greensboro, and then the sit-ins were used by the Mattachine Society, a gay rights advocacy group in the 1960s that would engage in sip-ins. Native Americans would engage in fish-ins. And then the Disability Civil Rights Movement. And I like this guy's sign, "I can't even get to the back of the bus," which is a reference to Rosa Parks. So the point they're trying to make in the framework here is that the Black Civil Rights Movement led to motivation and inspiration for other groups to come forward and seek change. And the reason why some of those groups would look to the African Civil Rights Movement as motivation and inspiration is because they were able to get legislation passed with the Civil Rights Act of '64 and the Voting Rights Act of '65. So again, the AP framework is making the case that the ADA was inspired by the Black Civil Rights Movement. People like Ed Roberts, who was admitted into Berkeley with an iron lung, and then once he showed up, was rejected. And then he wound up taking that case to the courts, arguing that Berkeley could not discriminate against him simply because his iron lung would not fit in the dormitory room. Another required image in the AP framework is Henrietta Lacks, who worked on cancer studies, and we'll see how that kind of plays out in a couple of slides. We're going to make a transition to something called the eugenics movement. The eugenics movement was a 1800 theory or pseudoscience that advocated the manipulation of genes to get a desired outcome. And so all of these people here represent contributing thought to the eugenics movement. And ultimately what these individuals wanted was government to mandate sterilization and reproduction. Why does this matter? The eugenics movement matters because of the involuntary experimentation that occurred on African Americans throughout American history, going back to slavery, where the slaves right here were experimented on without anesthesia, as depicted in this painting. Burgess Hardiman, this image right here, victim of extreme human radiation experiments by the U.S. government, the syphilis study in Tuskegee, Alabama, and the unsanctioned research, Henrietta Lacks. As we come to the end of the science and technology section, we want to think about these unknown heroes once again, coming back to the gift of Alvin White. What role could Black heroes have played in changing the direction of Black Americans in society? And then we're going to have to revisit these questions as we have a conversation about these three issues. At the end of this class, you want to be able to define these terms. And if you're struggling with the definitions, feel free to use this sheet